The bread was still warm when Rose Keller's trembling fingers closed around it, her hollow stomach clenching with desperate hunger as she turned to run from the baker's storefront in Pueblo, Colorado. But before she could take 3 steps, a firm hand caught her wrist, and the baker's furious shouts pierced the hot afternoon air of that summer day in 1878. Rose tried to wrench free, her thin frame no match for the burly baker whose face had turned purple with rage. She had been in town only 2 days, having walked nearly 30 miles after her father's farm had been seized for unpaid debts following his death from fever 3 weeks prior. Everything she owned had been taken, every last possession sold off to creditors who cared nothing for a 19-year-old girl left alone in the world. The small amount of money she had managed to hide had been stolen from her at a railway camp where she had sought work, and for the past 48 hours she had eaten nothing but wild berries found along the roadside. Thief! Someone fetch the sheriff! The baker bellowed, his meaty fingers digging into her wrist until she cried out in pain. The loaf of bread fell to the dusty street, and Rose watched it with tears streaming down her gaunt cheeks, knowing she would likely spend the night in a cell with an empty belly gnawing at her insides. A crowd began to gather, faces turning toward the commotion with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Rose felt shame burn through her body, hot and acidic. She had never stolen anything in her life until desperation had driven her to it. Her mother would have been horrified. The thought made her sob harder. That is enough. The voice was calm but carried an authority that made the baker pause. Rose looked up through her tears to see a tall man stepping forward from the crowd. He wore dusty riding clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see a strong jaw and eyes the color of creek water in spring. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent long hours in the saddle. "This is none of your concern, Maverick," the baker said, though his voice had lost some of its venom. "How much does she owe you?" The man called Maverick asked, his hand already moving to his pocket. "The bread costs 15 cents, but that is not the point." "She is a thief and needs to learn. Here is $1, Maverick said, pressing the coin into the baker's free hand. "That should cover the bread and any trouble. Now let her go." The baker looked at the silver dollar, then at Maverick's steady gaze, and finally released Rose's wrist. She stumbled backward, cradling her arm against her chest. Maverick bent and picked up the fallen loaf, brushing the dust from it before holding it out to her. "Take it," he said quietly. "You look like you need it more than the dirt does." Rose hesitated, her pride warring with her hunger. Pride lost. She reached out with shaking hands and took the bread, immediately tearing off a piece and shoving it into her mouth. The taste was like heaven, and she had to force herself not to wolf down the entire loaf right there in the street. "When did you last eat?" Maverick asked, his tone gentle. Rose swallowed hard. 2 days ago. Some berries." He shook his head slowly, and she saw something like anger flash in his eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "Come with me." "I cannot accept more charity," Rose said, though the words cost her dearly. "You have already done more than enough." "It is not charity. I am going to have my supper soon, and I could use the company. My name is Maverick Preston, and I have a small ranch about an hour's ride from here. But I keep a room at the boarding house when I am in town on business." He gestured down the street. "The dining room serves a decent meal." Rose knew she should refuse. She knew nothing about this man except that he had kind eyes and had saved her from arrest. But her stomach was making the decisions now, and she found herself nodding. "Rose Keller. Pleased to meet you, Miss Keller, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Maverick offered her his arm as though she were a fine lady instead of a starving thief in a faded, dusty dress. The gesture brought fresh tears to her eyes, and she took his arm carefully, aware of how filthy she must be. They walked together down the main street of Pueblo, past storefronts and saloons, past the sheriff's office where Rose averted her eyes in shame. Maverick kept up a steady stream of easy conversation, pointing out various landmarks and businesses, asking nothing of her but giving her time to compose herself. By the time they reached the boarding house, a substantial two-story building with a painted sign reading Mrs. Crawford's Fine Lodgings, Rose had managed to stop crying and eat half the loaf of bread. The dining room was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasted meat heavy in the air. Rose's mouth watered so intensely she had to swallow several times. Maverick guided her to a table in the corner and held out her chair. She sat carefully, very aware that she was the object of several curious stares from the other diners. A woman in her 50s approached, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Maverick Preston, I heard you were in town." "The usual." "Yes, please, Mrs. Crawford, and whatever the lady would like." Mrs. Crawford looked at Rose with eyes that took in every detail, from her threadbare dress to her hollow cheeks to the desperate way she clutched the remaining bread. But there was no judgment in that gaze, only a kind of weary understanding. "I will bring you both the roast beef dinner. You look like you could use a proper meal, dear." "Thank you," Rose whispered. When Mrs. Crawford had gone, Maverick leaned back in his chair and regarded Rose thoughtfully. "You are not from Pueblo." It was not a question, but Rose answered anyway. "No, I am from a small farm about 30 miles north. Was from there, I should say. My father died 3 weeks ago and the bank took everything." The words came out in a rush and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Why was she telling this stranger her troubles? "I am sorry," Maverick said simply. "And your mother died when I was 12. Consumption." Rose folded her hands in her lap, trying to stop their trembling. "I thought I could find work here in Pueblo. I can cook and clean and I am good with sewing. But no one wants to hire someone who shows up looking like a vagrant. You are not a vagrant. You are someone who has fallen on hard times through no fault of your own." Maverick's voice was firm. "There is a difference." Mrs. Crawford returned with 2 steaming plates piled high with sliced roast beef, potatoes swimming in gravy, carrots, and thick slices of buttered bread. Rose stared at the food as though it might disappear if she blinked. She picked up her fork with trembling hands and had to concentrate very hard on eating slowly, on not shoving the food into her mouth like an animal. It was the most difficult thing she had done in days. Maverick ate his own meal at a leisurely pace, continuing to talk about inconsequential things, giving her space to eat without feeling watched. He told her about his ranch, which he had built up over the past 5 years from nearly nothing. He raised cattle and horses, he said, and had just sold a string of both to the army fort north of town. "Do you have family nearby?" Rose asked when she had cleared half her plate and could finally speak without her voice shaking. "My parents are both gone. Father died in the war when I was 15 and my mother followed him 6 years ago. I have a sister in Kansas City, married with 3 children." He took a sip of his coffee. "I came west right after my mother passed. Needed a fresh start, I suppose. And you built a ranch from nothing." Rose heard the wonder in her own voice. "Not quite nothing. I had a small inheritance, enough to buy some land and a few head of cattle. The rest was work. A lot of work." He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Rose's heart skip. "I am not saying that to boast. Just to point out that sometimes when we lose everything, we find we are stronger than we thought." Rose looked down at her plate, his words settling over her like a warm blanket. "I feel anything but strong right now. You walked 30 miles. You survived 2 days with almost no food. You are still here, still fighting. That is strength, Miss Keller." She met his eyes and saw only sincerity there. Something in her chest loosened, a knot of fear and shame she had been carrying since her father died. "Thank you for the meal, Mr. Preston, and for earlier with the baker. Maverick, please, and you are welcome." He pushed back from the table. "Now, Mrs. Crawford keeps a washroom out back where you can clean up if you would like. And I believe she has some dresses that were left behind by previous guests. She might be willing to part with one." Rose felt her throat tighten again. "I cannot keep taking from you. Then consider it a loan. When you are back on your feet, you can pay me back." Maverick stood and placed several coins on the table. "I need to attend to some business at the stockyard, but I will be back in a few hours. Mrs. Crawford will look after you until then." Before Rose could protest further, he had settled his hat on his head and walked out, leaving her sitting at the table with a full belly for the first time in days, and a head spinning with confusion. Why was this stranger being so kind to her? What did he want in return? Her father had always said there was no such thing as a free meal, that everyone wanted something. Mrs. Crawford appeared at her elbow. "Come along, dear. Let us get you cleaned up." Rose followed her through the kitchen and out to a small washroom where a large copper tub sat waiting. Mrs. Crawford poured hot water from a kettle on the stove, adding cold from a pump until the temperature was just right. "There are clean towels on the shelf and soap in the dish. Take your time." The older woman paused at the door. "Maverick Preston is a good man, if you were wondering. One of the best I have met in my 30 years running this place. He wants nothing from you except to help someone in need." "But why?" Rose asked. "He does not even know me." Mrs. Crawford smiled sadly. "His mother nearly starved to death one winter when he was a boy, before his father went to war. A neighbor family took them in, fed them through the worst of it. Maverick has never forgotten. He helps people when he can because someone once helped him." After Mrs. Crawford left, Rose undressed slowly, peeling off her filthy clothes with relief. She sank into the hot water and felt tears come again, but this time they were tears of pure relief. She scrubbed herself until her skin was pink, washing away days of dust and sweat and fear. When she finally emerged, she found a simple but clean blue cotton dress laid out on a chair, along with fresh undergarments and stockings. The dress fit reasonably well, a little loose in the waist, but nothing she could not take in with a needle and thread. Rose braided her damp brown hair and studied herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked almost human again, though her face was still too thin and her brown eyes too large in her face. But it was a start. She found Mrs. Crawford in the kitchen, rolling out dough for pies. "Thank you for the dress. It suits you. The blue brings out your eyes." Mrs. Crawford dusted flour from her hands. "Now, Maverick mentioned you were looking for work. I could use help here at the boarding house. The pay is not much, but it includes room and board." Rose felt her heart leap. "Truly, truly. My last girl ran off to get married 2 weeks ago, and I have been doing everything myself since. I need someone who can cook, clean, do laundry, and help serve meals. The work is hard but honest." "I can do all of those things," Rose said quickly. "I ran my father's household for 7 years after my mother died. I am a hard worker, I promise." Mrs. Crawford nodded. "I can see that. When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me. Tomorrow morning will be soon enough. There is a small room on the 3rd floor, just big enough for a bed and a dresser. It is yours if you want it." Rose felt as though she might collapse from relief. A job, a room, food, safety. All in the course of a single afternoon, all because a stranger had shown her kindness. "I do not know how to thank you." "Thank Maverick when he gets back. He is the one who suggested it." Maverick returned just before sunset, finding Rose in the kitchen helping Mrs. Crawford with the dinner preparations. She looked up when he entered, her hands covered in flour from the biscuits she was making, and smiled at him with such genuine warmth that he felt it like a physical touch. "Mrs. Crawford gave me a job," Rose said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "I heard. That is wonderful." Maverick accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Crawford poured for him. "I am heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning, but I come into town every few weeks for supplies. May I call on you sometime, Miss Keller?" Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I would like that very much, Mr. Preston." "Maverick," he corrected gently. "Maverick," she repeated, and the name felt right on her tongue. He stayed for dinner, sitting at the same corner table, and Rose found herself glancing at him repeatedly as she served the other guests. He caught her looking once and winked, making her drop a spoon with a clatter. Mrs. Crawford laughed softly and shooed her back to the kitchen. That night, lying in her small room under clean sheets with her belly full and the distant sounds of the town settling in for sleep, Rose thought about the events of the day. This morning she had been a thief, desperate and alone. Tonight she had a job, a place to live, and the memory of kind creek water eyes. She thought about Maverick's hands as he had given her the bread, gentle despite their obvious strength. She thought about the way he had talked to her as though she were a person of worth, not a criminal or a beggar. She fell asleep with a smile on her face for the first time in weeks. The days fell into a rhythm. Rose woke before dawn to help Mrs. Crawford prepare breakfast for the guests. She served meals, washed dishes, scrubbed floors, changed linens, and did laundry until her hands were red and chapped. But the work felt good, purposeful. She was earning her keep, beholden to no one. Mrs. Crawford was a fair employer, quick to praise good work and patient with mistakes. The other women who worked at the boarding house, a cook named Martha and a maid named Lucy, welcomed Rose without judgment. Rose saved every penny she could from her small wages, determined to pay Maverick back for the $1 he had given the baker. But more than that, she found herself thinking about him constantly. She would be needing bread and remember the way he had held out the dusty loaf to her. She would be scrubbing a floor and think about his words, "You are stronger than you thought." She would be falling asleep and remember his smile. 3 weeks passed before he returned to Pueblo. Rose was serving lunch when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway of the dining room, hat in hand, his eyes searching until they found her. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, and she nearly dropped the pitcher of water she was holding. "Miss Keller," he said, crossing to her, "you look well." "I am well, thanks to you." Rose was acutely aware that every eye in the dining room was on them. "Are you here for a meal?" "I am here to see you, actually. I was hoping you might take a walk with me this afternoon if Mrs. Crawford can spare you." Mrs. Crawford appeared from the kitchen as if summoned. "She can take an hour. Go on, Rose." Rose untied her apron with trembling fingers and followed Maverick out into the bright afternoon sunshine. They walked side by side down the dusty street, and she noticed that he adjusted his long stride to match her shorter one. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good. Mrs. Crawford is wonderful to work for, and I like the other women. I have saved almost enough to pay you back the $1. She pulled a small cloth purse from her pocket. "I have 85 cents here." Maverick stopped walking and turned to face her. "Rose, I do not want you to pay me back. But I must. You said it was a loan." "I said you could consider it a loan if that made you feel better about accepting help." "But I do not want the money." He closed her fingers gently around the purse. "Keep it, save it for yourself. That does not seem fair. Life is rarely fair, as I think we both know." His voice was soft. "But sometimes we get lucky enough to meet people who make it a little less unfair. You have already repaid me." "How?" "By being here, by surviving. by making something of yourself from nothing." He started walking again, and she hurried to keep up. "I think about you, Rose. I have been thinking about you since the day we met," her breath caught. "I have been thinking about you too." "Good." He smiled that transforming smile. "Because I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it." Rose felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "I would allow it. I would like it very much." They walked for the full hour, talking about everything and nothing. Maverick told her about his ranch, describing the land with such love that she could almost see it. Rolling hills covered in grass, a creek that ran year-round, the distant mountains purple against the sky. He told her about his horses, each one with its own personality, and his cattle, stupid but profitable. He made her laugh with stories about his ranch hands, a mixed group of men from all walks of life who worked hard and asked few questions. Rose told him about growing up on the farm, about her mother who had taught her to read and write and do sums, about her father who had been stern but loving. She told him about the long months of her father's illness, the doctors who could do nothing, the creditors who had circled like vultures. She found it easier to talk about now, as though the pain had dulled to something manageable. When the hour was up and they returned to the boarding house, Maverick took her hand briefly. His palm was calloused and warm. "May I come see you again next week? Please do." He came the following week, and the week after that. Each visit he stayed a little longer, and each parting became a little harder. They walked together through Pueblo, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence. Maverick brought her small gifts, a hair ribbon, a book of poetry, a bag of hard candies. Rose baked him cookies and apple tarts, which he claimed were the best he had ever tasted. Mrs. Crawford watched their courtship with approval. "That man is besotted with you," she told Rose one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner. "And I with him," Rose admitted. "Is that foolish? We have known each other less than 2 months. Some people know each other for years and never truly see each other. Others know in an instant." Mrs. Crawford patted her hand. "Trust your heart, dear." Summer faded into early autumn. The days grew shorter and the air took on a crisp edge. Maverick came to town more frequently now, always with some excuse about needing supplies or checking on business, but they both knew the real reason. He was falling in love with her and she with him. One Saturday in late September, Maverick arrived with a wagon instead of his usual horse. "I want to show you the ranch," he said, "if you are willing to take the journey." Rose looked at Mrs. Crawford, who smiled and nodded. "Go on. Martha and Lucy can handle things here for the day. But Maverick Preston, you have her back before dark, you hear?" "Yes, madam." The ride took nearly 2 hours, following a winding trail that climbed gradually into the foothills. Maverick kept up a running commentary, pointing out landmarks and wildlife. Rose drank it all in, feeling a strange sense of homecoming even though she had never been here before. When they crested a final rise and the ranch came into view, Rose gasped. It was beautiful in a spare, wild way. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and windows that would let in plenty of light. The barn was larger, painted red with a new roof. Corrals held horses and cattle, and she could see several men working in the distance. "What do you think?" Maverick asked, and she heard the nervousness in his voice. "It is wonderful," Rose said honestly. "You built all this with help. But yes, this is mine, ours, if you will have it." She turned to look at him sharply. "What?" Maverick set the brake on the wagon and turned to face her fully. "Rose, I know we have not been courting long. I know the proper thing would be to wait longer to follow all the social rules. But I also know my own heart, and I know it belongs to you. I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you crying in the street over a loaf of bread." Tears pricked Rose's eyes. "Maverick, let me finish, please. You are strong and kind and brave. You work harder than anyone I know. You make me laugh and you make me want to be a better man. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build this ranch with you to fill that house with children and love and laughter." He took her hands in his. "Rose Keller, will you marry me?" She could barely see him through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like coming home. Rose wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and joy she felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maverick rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have a ring yet," he said. "I wanted to ask you first, to make sure before I bought one. I do not need a ring. I just need you." They spent the afternoon at the ranch. Maverick introduced her to his ranch hands, 5 men of varying ages who greeted her with respectful nods and knowing grins. He showed her the house, which was sparsely furnished but clean. Rose immediately began planning in her head: curtains for the windows, rugs for the floors, perhaps some paint for the walls. "When would you like to marry?" Maverick asked as they sat on the porch steps watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "As soon as possible. I do not want to wait." "Neither do I." "Next month?" "Next month," Rose agreed. They were married in Pueblo's small church on the first Saturday in October of 1878. Mrs. Crawford stood up as Rose's witness, and one of Maverick's ranch hands, a grizzled older man named Tom, stood up for him. Rose wore a new dress that Mrs. Crawford had helped her make, soft cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Maverick wore a new suit that made him look so handsome Rose could hardly breathe. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Maverick kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation dabbed at their eyes. They held a small celebration afterward at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Rose danced with her husband until her feet ached, feeling as though she were floating. That evening they drove back to the ranch together as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Maverick carried her over the threshold of their home, and Rose laughed with pure joy. This was hers now, all of it. This house, this life, this man who loved her. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Maverick taking his time to make sure Rose felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Rose thought about how far she had come. 4 months ago she had been stealing bread, desperate and alone. Now she was married to a wonderful man with a home and a future stretching out before her like a promise. "What are you thinking about?" Maverick asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "About how lucky I am. I am the lucky one." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Rose Preston. I love you too." The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Rose had to learn the rhythms of the ranch, the early mornings and late evenings, the constant work that came with managing livestock and land. But she threw herself into it with characteristic determination. She cooked for the ranch hands, tended a vegetable garden, learned to milk cows and collect eggs. She helped Maverick with the books, her neat handwriting and quick mind for figures proving invaluable. Winter came early that year, snow falling in late November and not letting up until April. Rose and Maverick spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and making plans for the spring. On nights when the wind howled outside, they lay in bed and held each other close, grateful for the warmth of the house and the warmth of their love. In March, Rose realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure before telling Maverick. When she finally did, presenting him with the news over breakfast one morning, he whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." In early November, I think. Rose placed her hand on her still flat belly. Are you happy? Happy. Rose, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. He knelt in front of her and pressed his ear to her stomach as if he could hear the tiny life growing there. Hello, little one. I am your father and I love you already. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rose felt tired and queasy for the first few months, but Maverick was endlessly patient, bringing her tea and crackers in bed, taking over her more strenuous chores. As her belly grew round, she found she could not stop smiling. She sewed tiny clothes and knitted soft blankets. Maverick built a cradle, working on it in the evenings, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. Mrs. Crawford came to stay in early November, arriving with her bags and a determined expression. I delivered my own 4 children and helped with countless others. You are not going through this alone, Rose. On a cold November night, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the bedroom hearth, Rose went into labor. It was long and painful and frightening, but Mrs. Crawford stayed with her through all of it, calm and competent. Maverick held her hand and let her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers. And finally, as dawn was breaking, their son was born. A boy, Mrs. Crawford announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a soft blanket. A healthy boy. Maverick took his son with shaking hands and looked down at the tiny red face with an expression of such love that Rose started crying all over again. He is perfect. Rose, he is absolutely perfect. Let me see him, Rose said, and Maverick carefully placed the baby in her arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and miniature nose and the shock of dark hair on his head, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. Hello, little one. I am your mother. They named him Matthew after Maverick's father. Matthew Preston came into the world fighting and continued that way, a loud and demanding baby who kept them up at all hours. But neither Rose nor Maverick minded. They were besotted with their son, marveling at each milestone, each smile, each new sound. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growing. Matthew learned to walk, then to run, then to ride. He followed his father everywhere, a miniature shadow with a constant stream of questions. When he was 3, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth, a quieter child with her mother's brown eyes and her father's smile. 2 years after that came another boy, Marcus, who was somehow both of them in miniature, stubborn and sweet in equal measure. The ranch prospered. Maverick's hard work and fair dealing earned him a reputation throughout the territory. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, hired more hands. Rose managed the household with competent efficiency, raising their children and keeping the ranch books, and still finding time to bake the pies Maverick loved. On their 10th anniversary, Maverick took Rose back to Pueblo, to the very spot where they had met. The bakery was still there, though the baker had retired and sold the business to his son. You remember? Maverick asked, his arm around her waist. Every second, Rose said. I was so scared that day, so desperate. And look at you now. He turned her to face him. Look at us. 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a life together. All because you were brave enough to try to survive, and I was lucky enough to be there when you needed help. You saved my life that day, and you have made my life worth living every day since. Maverick kissed her, right there in the street where they had met, and Rose kissed him back with all the love of 10 years together. They went to the bakery and bought bread, warm and fresh, and tore off pieces to eat as they walked. Rose thought about that desperate girl who had stolen a loaf so long ago, and she felt both infinitely distant from her and deeply connected to her. That girl had been her, and she had survived, and that survival had led to this beautiful life. More years passed. The children grew. Matthew became a serious young man who loved the ranch and worked alongside his father with quiet dedication. Ruth grew into a beauty with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, keeping her brothers in line. Marcus proved to be a natural with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal. Rose and Maverick grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with age. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. They knew each other's thoughts, finished each other's sentences, could communicate with a single glance across a crowded room. When Matthew married at 22, bringing home a sweet-faced girl named Anna, Rose and Maverick built them a house on the ranch land. When Ruth announced her engagement to a lawyer from Denver, they threw her a wedding that was the talk of Pueblo for months. Marcus showed no interest in marrying, content to work with the horses, and spend his evenings reading by the fire. On a warm summer evening in 1903, Rose and Maverick sat on their porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. They were both 66 years old now, their children grown, their grandchildren playing in the yard before them. Matthew and Anna's 3 children chased each other around the oak tree Maverick had planted the year Matthew was born. Ruth's twins, visiting from Denver, sat on the steps teaching Marcus's dog new tricks. Did you ever imagine this? Rose asked, her hand in Maverick's as it had been for 25 years. When we met that day in town, I imagined you, Maverick said. From the moment I saw you, I imagined a life with you. Maybe not all of this exactly, but the feeling of it, the rightness. I was stealing bread. You were surviving. You paid $1 for me. Best dollar I ever spent. Maverick squeezed her hand. Best investment of my entire life. Rose leaned her head on his shoulder and watched their grandchildren play. She thought about the long road that had led from that desperate day to this peaceful evening. She thought about hunger and fear and the kindness of strangers. She thought about love, how it could find you in the darkest moment and carry you through to light. I love you, she said. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more. And I you, Maverick said, always and forever. The sun sank below the mountains, painting everything gold. In the barn, the horses nickered softly. In the house behind them, Anna called that supper was ready. The children ran toward the door, laughing and shouting. And Rose and Maverick sat together on their porch, hand in hand, watching their legacy unfold before them. They had started with nothing but hope and a loaf of bread. They had built an empire of love. And as Rose looked at her husband in the fading light, at his dear, familiar face and gentle eyes, she knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it for this, for them, for the life they had made together. Years continued to unfold like pages in a well-loved book. The ranch changed with the times, adapting to new methods and technologies while still maintaining the core values Maverick had built it on. Hard work, fair dealing, and respect for the land. Matthew proved to be as capable a rancher as his father, implementing new breeding techniques that improved the herd's quality. Anna was a natural at the business side, her careful accounting and shrewd negotiations increasing their profits year after year. Ruth and her husband Daniel visited every summer, bringing the twins who were now growing into young women themselves. Ruth had become a force in Denver society, using her position to advocate for better treatment of workers and improved conditions in factories. She had her mother's determination and her father's sense of justice, and Rose and Maverick could not have been prouder. Marcus eventually did marry, surprising everyone when he brought home a widow named Sarah who had 2 young children. He had met her when her wagon broke down on the road near the ranch, and in typical Preston fashion, he had helped her and then lost his heart. Sarah was practical and kind, and her children took to ranch life with enthusiasm. Marcus proved to be a wonderful stepfather, patient and loving, and when Sarah gave birth to twin girls a year after their wedding, his joy was complete. Rose found herself surrounded by family, her home always full of children and grandchildren, the dinner table requiring extra leaves to accommodate everyone. She cooked enormous meals and baked countless pies and listened to childish secrets and dispensed grandmother wisdom. Maverick, now fully gray but still strong, taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, passing on skills he had learned decades ago. In the evenings, when the house finally quieted and they were alone, Rose and Maverick would sit together and marvel at what they had built. Not just the ranch, which now encompassed several thousand acres and employed over 20 men, but the family, the legacy, the love that bound them all together. "You ever think about that day?" Rose asked one night as they prepared for bed. She was 70 now, her brown hair completely white, her face lined with the marks of decades of laughter and work. "The day we met, all the time," Maverick said, his own face weathered but his creek water eyes still clear. "I think about how close I came to not being in town that day. I had almost decided to postpone my trip to stay at the ranch and work on fixing the fence in the north pasture, but something made me go." "Fate," Rose said. "Love," Maverick corrected. "Fate brought us to that place. Love made us stay." They climbed into bed, the same bed they had shared for over 30 years, and Maverick pulled Rose close. She fit against him perfectly as she always had, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. Inside, surrounded by the memories of decades, they drifted off to sleep. The spring of 1910 brought changes. Matthew and Anna decided to build a larger house on the far end of the ranch property, taking full control of the day-to-day operations. Maverick, now 73, was happy to let go of some of the responsibility, though he still checked on the herds every day and knew every animal by sight. Rose's health had been declining slowly over the past year. "Nothing serious," the doctor said, "just the natural wearing down that came with age. But she tired more easily now, needed more rest, moved a little slower." Maverick watched her with worry he tried to hide, but Rose saw it anyway. She had been seeing it for months. "I am not going anywhere yet," she told him firmly one morning as he fussed over her at breakfast. "We have at least another decade together, Maverick Preston. I have decided." "Have you now?" He smiled, but she could see the fear lurking behind it. "I have. We are going to see all our grandchildren grown and married. We are going to meet great-grandchildren. We are going to celebrate our golden anniversary in 3 more years." 50 years, Maverick said wonderingly. "When you say it like that, it sounds like a lifetime." "It is a lifetime. The best lifetime." Rose reached across the table and took his hand. "And we are not done living it yet." She kept her promise. They celebrated Matthew's 40th birthday with a huge party that brought family from 3 states. They attended Ruth's twins' debutante ball in Denver, beaming with pride as their granddaughters waltzed in beautiful gowns. They helped Marcus and Sarah move into a new house they built near the stables, perfect for their growing family of 6 children. The golden anniversary arrived on a perfect October day in 1913. The entire family gathered at the ranch, along with friends from Pueblo and neighboring ranches. Mrs. Crawford, now 92 and still sharp as a tack, made the journey from town where she still kept a hand in running the boarding house. Tom, Maverick's old ranch hand who had stood up at their wedding, was there with his own large family. The celebration lasted all day. There were speeches and toasts and enough food to feed a small army. Matthew presented his parents with a new grandfather clock for the main room. Ruth gave them a painted portrait of the two of them, done from a photograph taken the previous year. Marcus and Sarah organized a display of photographs spanning 5 decades, images of the ranch growing, the family expanding, the love enduring. As the sun began to set, Maverick stood and raised his glass. The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to him. Rose sat beside him, her hand in his, looking at the sea of beloved faces around them. 50 years ago, Maverick began, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a young woman in Pueblo who was trying to steal a loaf of bread because she was starving. I gave the baker $1, bought her a meal, and thought that would be the end of it. A simple act of kindness, nothing more. He paused, looking down at Rose with such love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. But it was not the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of the greatest adventure of my life. Rose, you have given me 50 years of love and laughter. You have given me 3 incredible children and more grandchildren than I can count. You have given me a home and a purpose and a reason to be grateful for every single day. His voice cracked slightly, and he had to pause to compose himself. The room was utterly silent except for the sound of several people quietly crying. I do not know what good deed I did to deserve you, but I thank God for it every single day. I thank God for that stolen loaf of bread, for that dollar coin, for every moment since. Happy anniversary, my love. Here is to 50 more years. To Rose and Maverick, someone shouted, and the room erupted in cheers. Rose stood, and Maverick pulled her into his arms, kissing her as he had kissed her on their wedding day, with all the passion and tenderness of a lifetime of love. The crowd cheered louder, and their children and grandchildren gathered around them, surrounding them with love. That night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Rose and Maverick sat on their porch in the darkness, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, settled into sleep. 50 years, Rose said softly. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I meant what I said earlier, every word. Maverick's arm tightened around her. Best dollar I ever spent. I tried to pay you back, you know, that first month. I know. I am glad I did not let you. Why? Because it was never about the money. It was about seeing someone in need and helping them. It was about recognizing something in you even then that I knew was special. He kissed her temple. And I was right, was I not? You were right, Rose agreed, about so many things. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Rose thought about the girl she had been, desperate and afraid, stealing bread to survive. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. But she was also still part of Rose, that kernel of determination and will to survive that had carried her through the darkest days. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. For helping me. For loving me. Rose turned to look at her husband, at his dear face lined with age but still so handsome to her eyes. For giving me this life. Rose, you gave yourself this life. You worked for it, fought for it, built it with your own 2 hands. I just had the good fortune to be along for the ride. We built it together. Yes, Maverick agreed. We did. The years after their golden anniversary were peaceful. Rose and Maverick settled into a comfortable routine of grandchildren visits, quiet dinners, and long evenings by the fire. They moved a little slower now, needed a little more rest, but their minds were still sharp and their love still strong. Rose taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, passing on skills and recipes that had been passed to her. Maverick taught his grandsons about horses and cattle, about reading the weather and reading the land. Together they presided over their growing family like beloved monarchs, dispensing wisdom and love in equal measure. In the spring of 1916, Rose caught a cold that would not go away. It settled into her chest, making her cough and wheeze. The doctor came and prescribed bed rest and hot tea, but the cold persisted, turning into pneumonia. Maverick hardly left her side, sitting by her bed day and night, holding her hand and reading to her. The family gathered, sensing that the end was near. Rose drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes confused. But whenever she opened her eyes, Maverick was there, and that was all that mattered. On a warm May afternoon, with the windows open and the smell of spring flowers drifting in, Rose opened her eyes to find Maverick sitting beside her, their hands clasped together as they had been for 53 years. "There you are," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Here I am. Always." His eyes were red from crying, but he smiled for her. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Rose admitted. "But happy. I have been so happy, Maverick." "I know, me too. The children, all here. Everyone is here." Maverick glanced toward the door where their children and grandchildren waited quietly. "Do you want to see them?" "In a moment. Right now, I just want to look at you." Rose studied his face, memorizing every line and plane, though she knew it as well as her own. "You have been the love of my life. You know that, do you not? And you have been mine." Maverick brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "From the very first moment, I took one look at you and knew my life had changed forever." "Best dollar you ever spent," Rose said, her lips curving in a small smile. "Best dollar I ever spent," Maverick agreed, his voice breaking. Rose's eyes began to close. She was so tired, but she was not afraid. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life filled with more love than she had ever dreamed possible. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always and forever." "Always and forever," Rose repeated. And then, with her hand in Maverick's and the sound of her family's voices drifting through the open door, she closed her eyes and slipped peacefully away. Maverick sat with her for a long time, his hand still holding hers, tears streaming down his face. Their children came in eventually, gathering around the bed, crying and holding each other. But Maverick could not let go, not yet, not when doing so would mean accepting that she was truly gone. Finally, Matthew gently touched his father's shoulder. "Dad, you need to let her rest now." "I cannot," Maverick said brokenly. "I cannot let her go." "You do not have to let her go. She will always be with you, with all of us." Matthew knelt beside his father. "But you need to let her rest." With shaking hands and tears blurring his vision, Maverick finally released Rose's hand. He leaned down and kissed her forehead one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for 53 years of love. Thank you for everything." They buried Rose on a hillside overlooking the ranch, in a spot she had always loved, where you could see the mountains in the distance and hear the creek running below. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, all of them touched by Rose's kindness and love over the years. Mrs. Crawford, ancient and frail but determined, came from Pueblo to say goodbye. The baker's son, now running the bakery, brought dozens of loaves of bread in honor of how it had all began. Maverick stood by the grave after everyone else had left, looking down at the freshly turned earth. "I will see you again, my love," he said quietly. "Not today, but someday. And when I do, I will tell you everything you missed. I will tell you about the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. I will tell you how much we missed you. And then we will sit together and watch the sunset, and we will be together again, always and forever." He visited the grave every day, bringing flowers and sitting for hours, talking to Rose as though she could hear him. And maybe she could. Matthew worried about his father, about the deep sadness that had settled over him. But there was nothing to be done except wait and love him and make sure he knew he was not alone. 3 years passed. Maverick continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family, still involved in the daily operations, though Matthew did most of the work now. He spent time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them the things Rose would have taught them if she were still there. He baked pies using her recipes, though they never tasted quite as good. He slept on his side of the bed, leaving hers empty, as though she might return at any moment. On an October morning in 1919, 61 years to the day after he had first met Rose in Pueblo, Maverick did not wake up. Matthew found him in his bed, his face peaceful, one hand stretched out across Rose's empty pillow as though reaching for her. The doctor said his heart had simply stopped, worn out after 82 years of life. They buried him next to Rose on the hillside. The whole family gathered once more, 3 generations of Prestons, all of them living proof of the love that had started with a stolen loaf of bread and a $1 coin. Matthew stood at the head of the grave and spoke about his parents, about their love and their legacy, about how they had taught him what it meant to build a life worth living. "My father once told me that he saw my mother on the worst day of her life," Matthew said, his voice strong despite his tears. "She was desperate and afraid, stealing food to survive. But he did not see a thief. He saw a person who needed help. And by helping her, by seeing her humanity when she felt she had lost it, he found the love of his life." He paused, looking out over the assembled crowd. "They taught us that love is about more than romance and passion, though they had plenty of both. Love is about seeing someone at their worst and helping them find their best. It is about building something together day by day, year by year. It is about choosing each other, over and over again, through good times and bad." Matthew placed a hand on his father's coffin. "Rest well, Dad. Give Mom a kiss from all of us. And thank you. Thank you for showing us how to love." Time moved on, as it always does. The ranch continued to prosper under Matthew's guidance, and then under his sons, and then under his grandsons. The Preston family grew and spread. Dozens, and then hundreds of descendants, all of them carrying in their veins the blood of a starving girl and a kind cowboy who had fallen in love over a loaf of bread. The house on the ranch was eventually turned into a family museum of sorts, preserved as it had been when Rose and Maverick lived there. Photographs lined the walls, showing the progression from that first shy couple to the sprawling family they had created. The cradle Maverick had built for Matthew sat in one corner, polished and beautiful. Rose's recipe book, stained and worn from decades of use, was displayed in the kitchen. The grandfather clock Matthew had given them on their 50th anniversary still stood in the main room, its steady tick marking the passage of time. Every year on the first Saturday in October, the anniversary of Rose and Maverick's wedding, the family gathered at the ranch for a reunion. They came from all over the country, sometimes from other countries, all these descendants of love. They ate food made from Rose's recipes, told stories about their legendary great-great-great-grandparents, and toasted with raised glasses to the couple who had started it all. And every year, someone, usually the oldest member of the family, would tell the story. The story of a young woman so desperate she stole bread to survive. The story of a cowboy who paid $1 and offered her a meal at his table. The story of how one act of kindness on a hot summer day in Pueblo, Colorado, in 1878, had changed the course of countless lives. "Remember," they would say at the end of the telling, "love is not always grand gestures and dramatic moments. Sometimes love is as simple as seeing someone in need and offering them bread. Sometimes love starts with a $1 and a willingness to help. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that simple act of kindness becomes the foundation of something beautiful and lasting." The story was passed down through generations, told and retold until it became legend. But unlike most legends, this one was true in every detail. Rose and Maverick had been real people who had lived real lives and built a real legacy. They had loved each other with a depth and constancy that most people only dream of. They had turned their darkest moment into their brightest beginning. On the hillside where they were buried, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still clearly readable. Rose Preston, 1859–1916. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she survived with strength and loved with her whole heart. Maverick Preston, 1837–1919. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he saw someone in need and found his forever. Between the headstones, planted by their children and tended by their descendants, grew a rose bush that bloomed faithfully every spring, its flowers the color of sunset, filling the air with sweetness. And if you stood there on a quiet evening and listened carefully, you could almost hear it, the echo of a love that had transcended death, that lived on in every child who called Preston their name, in every family that gathered to remember, in every act of kindness paid forward in honor of a stolen loaf of bread, and the man who saw past the theft to the person beneath. This was their legacy. Not the ranch, not the money, not even the sprawling family tree. Their legacy was love, simple and profound, the kind of love that started with seeing another person's humanity and ended with building a life that mattered. The kind of love that proved, day after day and year after year, that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. And so the story ended where it began, with bread and hunger and a man who chose compassion over judgment. But in the ending was also a beginning, an endless cycle of love passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the tale. Rose and Maverick's story became their children's story, and their children's children's story, on and on, love multiplying and spreading like ripples in a pond, touching lives that would never even know where it had started. But somewhere, in the space beyond this world, Rose and Maverick knew. They sat together on a porch that looked out over rolling hills and distant mountains, her hand in his, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. They were young again, as they had been when they fell in love, but they carried with them the wisdom of all those years together. And they were content, because they had lived well and loved well and left behind something beautiful. "Best dollar I ever spent," Maverick said, as he had said countless times before. "Best loaf of bread I ever stole," Rose replied with a smile. And somewhere far below in the world they had left behind, their family gathered around the dinner table, passing plates of food made from Rose's recipes, telling stories, laughing, loving each other, living the legacy, honoring the love, proving day by day that Rose and Maverick's story had not ended at all. It had only just begun.